How much do you want to bet she's about to make her disappear like a magician's trick? This is 2019's Dr. Sleep, and it's a sequel to the classic horror movie The Shining. Spoiler alert, while I might be giving you my opinion on the film, that's no substitute for watching it for yourself. Links to the film are in the description. As Rose tries to show the girl a magic trick, her friends start to show up from within the woods. But Rose starts to test if the girl's magic as well. Sure enough, the girl seems to possess some magic power. And Rose holds on to her when she tries to go back to her mother. And her friends close in on them before we jump to the title screen. It's here that we see Danny riding his tricycle through the halls of the iconic Overlook Hotel. He passes room 237, and a creepy, disfigured woman starts to appear in the shadows. Then, Danny wakes up from his nightmare and walks through his home's hallway. After seeing that his nightmares have followed him to the real world, his mother Wendy saves him in the nick of time. Danny seems to be scarred from his time in the hotel, and that becomes clear when he seems to have a one-sided conversation with the ghost of Dick the next morning. It's here that we see Dick speak inside of his head, and Danny decides that he won't shine anymore. If shining means that I've got to be haunted by dead, naked, water-soaked women, I wouldn't shine anymore either. I know that might be a great thing for some of you, but you can keep the shine. I'm doing okay without being haunted by that. Dick tries to explain that he doesn't have to let the beings he sees when he shines control or hurt him. He tells her about a trick he learned from his grandmother, and he gives Danny a box to help him with his journey.
Stick your nose inside and see if there's a smell.
Just a heads up, if this didn't have Dick telling a little kid to do that, this would be the perfect time to put a clip of Dick in the Box's chorus. But we're gonna keep this as PG as possible. For those of you that know the song, you played the clip in your head, so that's a win. Dick tries to tell him that he'll build a box like that in his mind, and he'll save it for the drowning woman. That evening, Danny goes to the tub, where he locks away the woman in his mind box, and Wendy can see a visual improvement in him. Then we cut to grown Danny, who's a druggy drunk that anyone could see had a troubled childhood. After seeing the dismal existence Danny lives in, we cut to Rose the Hat, who's scoping out Andy, who controls a date with her words. As Andy leaves the theater, Rose catches up to her, and she learns that her powers don't work on women. Suddenly, Danny and Rose catch a glimpse of another little girl that uses her shine to manipulate items. She's so powerful that it wakes up Danny, who's riding the train. Back at Rose's caravan, she talks to Andy about her power. Eventually, Danny arrives in town, and he meets Billy, who welcomes him to town and helps him find a place to live. How has Danny made it all these years? Him turning to drugs and alcohol makes perfect sense, but I feel like that still wouldn't be enough to make dreams or visions like this okay. I've seen people lose themselves over way less than that. The next day, Billy takes Danny to a local meeting where we find out that it's an AA meeting. The doctor talks to him after the meeting, and he makes sure Danny knows that there's no judgment here. At the end, Danny notices that the doctor is missing his watch, and Danny uses his shine to tell him where he left it earlier. The next day, the doctor calls him in to try and find out how he knew all of that, and he asks what he wants to do in town now that he's here. The doctor offers him a few shifts as an orderly at the hospice house. When we see Andy next, she's been welcomed to the community after sucking the soul of a girl in a jar. When she comes to, Rose explains that she had to die to become immortal, but it's all over now. During Danny's next shift, he gets interrupted by a cat that goes to a man's bed, and the man knows that the cat's trying to tell him that he's going to die. Danny takes this time to sit with the man and tell him that he's right. As the man starts to panic about dying, Danny uses his shine to speak to the man in his mind, and he explains that he's just going to sleep. Hey, Dr. Sleep! Well, this is definitely not the context that I expected the title to come from, but it's definitely a creative way to go about it. Could you imagine if that's what someone saw every time a person died? Hospitals would be so smoky. But it would definitely confirm the existence of a soul. When Danny gets to his room, he notices that someone has scribbled a hello message on his wall. He takes the time to answer, and we see the girl with the powerful shine smile and go to sleep. As time passes, we see that Danny continues being the Dr. Sleep of the hospice center, and when he gets back to his room, he's still getting messages. But we see that time has passed, and the girl is now a teenager. Her name's Abra, and she's heading to school. That's a nice little Ruby Easter egg. Go check that show out too. Back at the caravan, Rose sits on her camper to try and find the gold mine of shining souls, and Crow comes to her to ask her to open a canister of souls. That night, she opens one of the few remaining canisters, and the camp feeds. The next day, Crow heads into town to scope out a potential shining kid, and once he decides that he's found the one he's looking for, he has some of the camp members abduct him on his walk home. After they get the boy to the camp, they tie him down and prepare him for the ritual. As they torture the boy and feed on his steam, Abra wakes up because she feels the connection. Abra calls out for Rose to stop, and they see each other from across the plane. The pain becomes so much that Abra shatters through to Danny's wall, and the same words that traumatized him as a child appear. Red rum, also known as murder. Again, if I was Danny, I'd be done with all this crap. There's no way that I would risk losing my sanity over something that I don't even understand in the first place. He has no idea where these messages are coming from. For all he knows, it's the naked tub lady again. But Danny's better than that, and he heads out to find Abra. On the other coast, Abra tries to explain that she's okay to her mother, but she doesn't seem too convinced. When Abra goes to school, she looks up the boy that was killed the night before, and she takes that information back home where she tries to connect with him. She gets glimpses of what happened to him, and she's transported into the mind of Rose. Once Rose realizes what's happening, she looks into a reflection to see Abra in her room. Yeah, I hate when they do scenes like that. It reminds me of the shower scenes from the Grudge movies. Stop touching people's heads and hair. The next day, Abra pretends to go to school, but she hops on a bus instead. She takes it all the way to the town that Danny's in, and she finds Danny in the middle of town. When she comes up to speak to him, she speaks to him through her shine, and Danny knows exactly who she is. They sit down on a park bench to talk about their shine, but Danny isn't too keen on joining her in her plan to track down the caravan. That night, Danny goes to his orderly shift, and he's visited by Dick, who convinces him to help Abra. At the same time, Abra tries to connect with Rose to find out where they need to go to harvest her steam. This time, Abra's ready for her, and she springs a trap in her mind to steal information on her. Abra straight up owns Rose here. She destroys her hand in a filing cabinet in a fashion that will make anyone think twice about sticking their hand in one, and she manages to get in her head to find out secrets. I'm sure Rose got something too, but she was absolutely not expecting any of that. So I think this is definitely a win for Abra. Plus, once Danny finds out about this, he realizes that it's either now or never to start helping, so that's an all-around win for Abra. Whoop whoop! Back in the camp, Rose speaks to the oldest member of the caravan as he starves to death. As he starts to go, we find out that he managed to live for over 1,000 years by eating steam from shiners. But in the end, he turns to steam himself. Back in town, Danny goes to explain his story to Billy before he leaves, and he ends up tagging along. The next day, Abra goes to check on Danny, who's driving to her, and she explains what it's like to be inside of Rose's mind. For a second, she even pops into his head, and she asks about the boxes that Danny used to lock up the hauntings. He explains that he dealt with a place that was similar to these people, and he locked traces of it away in those boxes. Meanwhile, the camp is packed up to leave, but Crow convinces Rose to stay behind since Abra managed to get into her mind. Now Billy and Danny arrive at the site where the boy was buried, and Abra tells them where to go. While they drive, Billy talks about the possibility of Danny being crazy. That's the kind of best friend that everyone needs. The kind that can realize how crazy you can be at times, but can still sit there and say that they can work with that, accepting to a fault. But be careful, sometimes those friends are even crazier than you are. The two men dig away at the spot Abra told them to, and they eventually find the boy's body. Now that Billy realizes that Danny isn't crazy, he realizes that the truth is even worse than that. When they go to leave, Danny tries to tell Abra that she has to tell her parents what's going on, since Rose is likely to use them to get to her. When they eventually show up at Abra's, she shows her father everything that she's seen, and he believes everything now. Appropriate response. Honestly, it's the only response to everything that I can agree with so far. When asked where the Soul Eaters are, Abra touches the dead boy's glove to establish a connection, and she sees that the caravan's getting close. As they prepare for the creepers, Danny gets Abra to play a little trick on them. They head for a skate park where Billy sets up with his hunting rifle. Meanwhile, Rose connects with her people to get a glimpse of what's going on. She sees that they're pulling up to the park, and Abra's sitting and waiting for them. After showing Andy the illusion they set up, Billy and Danny open fire on all of the caravans and kill all but a couple of them. When they approach the RV, Andy comes out and manipulates Danny's mind. It's now that we see Abra still at her home, and she calls out to Danny to pull him out of his trance. At the same time, Billy shoots Andy and kills her. No, not Billy! When the final creeper dies, we see that the Crow actually went straight for Abra and killed her father. When she comes to, she sees that Crow has dosed her with something that puts her powers to sleep. When Danny tries to come up with a solution, he ends up possessing Abra and speaks to Crow. He ends up pulling the car with his mind, and Crow flies out the windshield so fast that he dies right there in the woods. Rose feels this, and she's not happy. As Abra starts to walk down the road, she's greeted by Rose's projection, and she knows that it's on now. Rose superdoses herself with 2 cans of steam, and Danny goes to pick Abra up. It turns out that he's taking her to the Overlook Hotel. Once they get there, Danny heads inside to wake up the hotel, and it hums back to life as he wanders the halls that traumatized his childhood. As he gets glimpses of the past, I get the best feeling of nostalgia. Then I remembered that I actually didn't even like The Shining. I felt it was very overrated, and I personally liked the book more than the movie. Seeing the hall where the twins were, and the bar, just felt good though. Once Abra sees that Rose has arrived, she heads inside with Danny and waits. Once they're all face to face, Danny and Abra send Rose's mind into the labyrinth of a garden that Danny's father froze to death in years ago. After a short game of cat and mouse, Rose catches Abra, but she makes a realization. That was epic. On top of that, Rose finally asks Danny what I've been wondering this whole time. How did she miss him his whole life? Yeah, no one gets an answer, and she tries to suck his steam. I couldn't think of a cleaner way to say that either. Soon, she realizes that Danny has so many others locked away in boxes in his mind, and he decides to open them to let the terrors eat. That's one of the most unsettling images I've seen in a while. After they finish off Rose, they turn their attention to Danny. He tries to lock them back in the boxes, but it seems like he may be too late. Meanwhile, Abra has to deal with the terrors of the house now, and it turns out that Danny's one of them now. He chases after Abra with an axe, and Abra ends up hiding in room 237. When Danny shows up, Abra recognizes that it's just a hotel, and she tells it that Danny went straight to the boiler room when he got there. She ends up escaping when Danny takes back control for a second, but that doesn't last long. Abra makes it out of the hotel, and Danny heads down to the boiler room. Once the hotel realizes that it can't beat Danny, it leaves him to burn with the rest of the hotel. He's finally at peace. When Abra gets back home, she talks to Danny as he gives her advice, but it turns out that it's just the ghost of his mind. When her mother asks who she's talking to, Abra decides to let her in on her shine. Just when Abra goes to join her mother for dinner, she sees the woman from 237 in her bathroom, and she goes into the room to lock her away. Then, the credits roll. Like I said before, I always thought The Shining was overrated, and Stephen King himself was disappointed by it. When the creator of the story isn't happy with the work, I don't feel too bad for not liking it. However, Dr. Sleep was amazing, and it was the perfect follow-up to the story I didn't realize I needed to see. I definitely recommend it. Here's some other psychological horror recaps to check out next. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.